Okay, I'm back. So initially, what I was trying to do, having been a CNA and knowing something about caregiving, initially what I was trying to do was for the most acutely in need of care. In other words, Miss Mary, for example, is a lady that she had a degree from college and she once had a productive life, and nobody can figure out what happened to her, but now all she does is she sits on a park bench and she curls up in blankets, and that's where she stays, on this park bench, and she sleeps there. And I used to feed her I'd go get an 8-piece of chicken and I'd eat 4 pieces and I'd give the rest of it to Miss Mary, and I'd have a conversation with her and interact with her. But something just wasn't quite right. Somewhere down the line, something snapped, something broke. So what we offered Miss Mary the agricultural housing and education program in the form of my infirmary. Part of the program is, I think, the most important part and the most complex to implement and to explain and to try to show where forward progress can really be made with these people. And I think that we're going to see success stories. We're going to see people that, like Mr. Smith, laying on the ground. We picked him up and said, "Hey, buddy, you know, you need some help. You're going to die out here. You know, you've got to eat something. You know, you can't just continue to deteriorate like this." And that Mr. Smith, you know, we might find out that he's got relatives that have no idea where he's been all this time, and he doesn't even know how he got there anymore. So, you know, he's going to wake up to a whole new self. But we take a postage stamp farm, approximately 40 acres, any kind of postage stamp size in the country, because we want to avoid stress. Stress, malnutrition, okay. When you're in town, even traffic noise can be a form of stress that we don't actually consciously realize. So if we move someone who is suffering from any of this into a quiet, okay, then already we're making progress. Nutrition. We give this person food, he's going to respond to the food. We get him away from the alcohol, away from the drugs. Then we can start to address mental issues via therapy. We create internships, you know, for psychotherapy. Kids went to school for 7 years to become psychiatrists, and we can create internships for this. So that people like Mr. Smith and Miss Mary can get 2 hours twice a week in addition to some food, and we can assess what their problems are. What exactly do they suffer from? Do they have a split personality disorder? That takes time to diagnose this stuff, and we just can't leave people running around out in the streets being undiagnosed. We have no idea what's the matter with them, and they're not capable of fending for themselves in our modern society, whereas we're pay up or get out. So these folks, maybe they initially had medications, maybe they had lithium, for example, that kept them stable, and they got off of their lithium and became unstable, and to the degree that there's nobody around to help them to realize this or to take them to get proper medical attention and get them restabilized, to get their lithium levels checked, their blood levels checked, all those type of thing, okay? So we have 7 million people out there who are homeless. I'm told that 4 million of that number are children. So these children all have parents that are trying to struggle to keep shoes on their feet and keep them in school, even though they're homeless. We've had everybody from 2020 to 60 Minutes do programs about homeless people living in parking lots in Walmart, and homeless children living in vans and going to school. And it's, in this country, there's no excuse for that. Once we go ahead and get the Fed to redirect these hundreds of millions of dollars that we're spending in each state into the hands of the state government, the county government, city government. Once we streamline that funding, then we're gonna save 60%, and what we're already doing is gonna go 60% farther. But we have to do it in a manner by which we create work and housing and education and allow these people to make progress and move forward and to be healthy and as economically sound as we can possibly make them. Bringing me to the point that we can no longer tolerate indigence in this society. If we have indigence, then we have food stamps. Well, if we didn't have indigence, we wouldn't need food stamps. We'd already be saving $534 billion a year as a nation, and that's every year. But once we are able to get these folks into a setting, say a postage stamp farm, every one of these postage stamp farms holds, say, 12 people. And so then we take the able-bodied homeless, and they can do some of the chores over here and live on the same property and do some of the chores that these people can't do because they're unable, okay? And once they become able, you see there's gonna be a segue, there's gonna be a transition point where we're gonna be successful in getting some of these people to be able. Some of these people may never be anything but cared for in a most respectful and dignified manner that we possibly can. This is our whole philosophy with the mentally handicapped. We have group home settings and work programs, and the philosophy is so that these people can live in the most dignified manner possible, okay? That's where we are in how we now treat our mentally handicapped, as opposed to what we used to do, which was throw them in asylums because we just didn't understand anything about what was wrong with these people. So we threw them in asylums and treated them like animals until Dorothea Dix came along. And Dorothea Dix reformed that, so we didn't treat them like animals anymore, but we're still doing things like shock therapy that doesn't do anything for anybody. It's just something that somebody thought would work. So we've evolved in the days of Dorothea Dix. The only homeless people that we had during her time were people who had something wrong with them. They couldn't fend for themselves. They could not pick up an axe and go out into the woods and build them a cabin and slay a bear, for example. They just couldn't do it. They had something wrong with them. And most of which we didn't have names for, we didn't understand it. We had no idea how to treat it and how to make these people better, or at least as well as we could possibly make them. We did not have that science back then. And we've evolved over our history to where we've gone from throwing people in asylums and treating them like animals to creating work programs and halfway houses for them. So let's do the same for our homeless citizens that we do for our mentally handicapped, for our blind, for our deaf, for those who have mental issues, and those who have everything from Down syndrome to multiple sclerosis, muscular dystrophy. We have to modernize our entire healthcare system in terms of how we treat the homeless individuals who aren't able to fend for themselves and get through the maze of society, which means pay rent and work. We have to work, so it should be our right to work. We just haven't made that transition yet. So anyway, we go to the second level of people who are able, but maybe they're recovering from whatever this is, but they're still able to do chores like gather eggs and learn to take care of poultry and learn a little bit of animal husbandry. And on a postage stamp farm, let's say I want to educate these people in a half a dozen different things on a small scale on a small farm, so that that can be a perpetual education program, and one person might like one subject better than the next, and so they have choices and they can learn them all, as long as they're in the program. So I've got bees, I've got mushrooms, and mushrooms, by the way, for the state of Oregon is a win-win situation. For one thing, huge mushroom farms due to the climate can be created. In addition to, we can preserve and propagate all of the different varieties of the wild mushrooms that tourists come here to cultivate. Last year we had a drought, we didn't have as much mushrooms. So that we can learn to propagate and cultivate mushrooms on a huge scale. And that's a whole different animal. But bees are something else that we can not only learn to raise bees, but we learn to process them. So the processing of all these different products, and this is a whole vocation right here. And if we can give these people accredited learning, to where after 12 months time, they're accredited in bees, or they're accredited in mushrooms, or they are accredited in poultry, or dairy. You know, there's a whole science to a dairy farm. Learning to milk cows, just being a milker and going in at 6 o'clock in the morning and organizing these cows and milking them and make sure they're clean and everything else. That's a whole industry. And our average farmer is 60 years old, so this average farmer has a son, and that son calls the state of Oregon up one day and says, hey, my dad just had a stroke, I need some help out here with this dairy farm, do you have somebody? Well, yeah, we got a guy over here, he's just about accredited in his dairy program, we can send him right over there to help you out. How long will you need him? You're gonna have to pay him, of course, but we've got somebody for you. Just to give you an idea, we are also creating a labor pool. We're not trying to compete with the farmer. We're not trying to fluctuate the prices. We are trying to create a labor pool for our farmers in addition to export. In other words, I want all of the agricultural that I can possibly get to be exported outside the U.S. That brings money in. That means that we're strengthening our economy. So if I raise a bunch of honey and I raise a bunch of mushrooms and I export them to Dubai, I get a better price than I did if I sold them here in the United States in the first place. If we need them in the United States, great, but let's try to get a better price out of them and sell them to somebody that needs them, that doesn't have them. We want to create that relationship and trade. So in doing that, so our able-bodied, we are able then to educate them, and I mean, I could go on and on. There are, and vegetables. We need vegetables. So all these different things on one farm. And say we've got 12 individuals here. Well, we create, we're gonna need, it's a continuing program in that the program continually grows. In other words, until we run out of places to put these halfway houses on these farms, and until we run out of places to put or to build barrack style housing, which, you know, so that we can supplement the housing part of it and create housing for more people who are, say, in need of care, for example, and letting the able-bodied help with the chores so that agriculture from that can go toward paying that program. The sales of the agriculture will go back to the state in which the program is implemented in, And we can do that in all the states of the union, so long as the feds redirect the funding, get it out of the hands of the private sector into the hands of our government, and let it go 60% farther in building this program perpetually, so that 50 years from now, we don't have a food stamp program, and we have a program by which Joe Smith, hey, my unemployment's running out, the landlord's gonna evict me, I got no place to go and I got no work. Well, yes, you do. You can go right down to the welfare office and sign up for the agricultural housing and education program and go right to work. You got your own room out there. You're gonna get minimum wage. You can be in the program for a year, and at the end of the day, you come out accredited in something that will help another farmer or help to sustain other farming operations within that state, whichever state it might be. Okay? So, some of our more advanced, complicated courses, micrology, for example, is going to be a tough one. But I have people behind me. I know people have already offered to donate to me mushroom cultures so that I can use them for education. And I've had to tell them, no, wait a minute, I'm not quite there yet. But to digest all of this, it makes more sense to take $100 million with land that's already surplus and create your agricultural export in order to fund the state and fund the program. And we can continue to do this over time, perpetually, just until we run out of land, until we run out of people. Well, we're gonna run out of land before we run out of people. The other reason to do this is 50 years from now, what's our population gonna be? We're already at 318 million people. We're gonna have to figure out how to feed them. Everybody's gonna have to eat. So where are we gonna be 50 years from now? Hopefully we won't be spending the $534 billion a year on food stamps. We'll be spending it on agriculture, and housing. And because we are going to have to build 8,000 units per state, then we can take our empty schools, and we're gonna go for building trades. Construction. All these trades, we're going to have to find out and assess the abilities through testing to find out what these people can and cannot learn. Keeping in mind, this is all done on a voluntary basis. If we offer it to these people, those who are able will then be able to get on their feet and make progress. Those who are unable to do so, we will have been able to assess that. We will either be able to treat it and make it well, or we'll know why. 50 years from now, we might not, for example, of scientific progress in human science, we found out that one of the main causes of mental retardation was complications at birth, lack of oxygen during the birth process. And so we had a lot of cases back in the day, before we had sonograms, before we had the medical science. We had, say, 100 cases of complications at birth causing mental retardation. So we had a lot of mentally handicapped people. And through science, we've now narrowed that down to where it almost doesn't exist anymore. 100 to 1 ratio, I believe, and that was figures from 30 years ago when I first became a CNA. So this is where we need to be. Well, we don't have any homeless people anymore because now we have a program that they can volunteer to sign up and get into. And maybe we don't have people that are suffering as much because we figured out that, say, Chaga tea helps mental patients with their mental problems. We don't know whether it does or whether it doesn't. We might find out that lion's mane tea helps mental patients. We don't know whether it does or whether it doesn't. We might find out that acupuncture helps mental patients. We already know that it helps with alcohol and drugs, okay? And smoking cigarettes is another issue. Cigarette addiction is one of the causes of poverty in this country, as far as I'm concerned, and there's not enough information being let out to the public in terms of just how bad of an issue that is. But back in the day when we were ignorant, we didn't know anything, we didn't realize that our lungs were never designed to inhale smoke, and now we have a lot of people with COPD and sucking on oxygen and what have you due to the tobacco industry lobbying our government for policy. So we need policy change totally, completely. Our federal government has to use all this to craft it into the bill that redirects that funding so that we can start making progress. Because at this point we have 7 million homeless people. We have all these people. Okay, so we would need to, in the state of Oregon, if we take a look at it, and I'll do another segment completely on the state of Oregon and how we can implement this program. I wish I had this information on all the land, because it's not only the state that's involved, but the federal government has control and ownership of properties within each state, and that falls under BLM and DOT, some of it falls under the state and county. It's very hard to get on the same page with all this stuff so that we can decipher what it is, okay? What it is, where it is. What I would like to see is, say for example, we find that we have 2 or 3 parcels that are close to town. So we have 2 or 3 parcels of vacant land that are close to a city. Let's go ahead and prioritize those for housing and build apartment complexes, which will give us part of our 8,000 Section 8 housing that we need, that needs to be owned by the state government, rented by the state government. In other words, the state government needs to be landlords where Section 8 is concerned. Otherwise, that Section 8 housing will be very slow, if not created at all, because the private sector wants a better return on their money than they would get from the Section 8, which is why it's not being built, it's not being created. And just that simple. So rather than have a project housing program like we had back in the 50s, we're no longer bigots, but we do understand that people need housing and they need running water and electricity in order to be civilized. So we've gotten to that point where we need to simply enable people and lift them up out of the quagmire of indigence and homelessness that we now have. And so, if we can do that, if we can start doing that, we will have created, as the government says, hundreds of jobs within this sector. Social workers and people that worked in the 501c3s, those 501c3s might become obsolete, but there will always be a direction for that energy. There'll always be someplace for them to go within this program, because it will be huge. We're talking 100 farms or so, and more. Just as many as we can make it until we no longer have the need for any expansion of this program, until we come to the point where we need to start even cutting back. It may take us a long time. But anyway, that's my idea on that, and I'm going to go to part number 3 here just in jiffy. Go ahead.